Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Wednesday at 9:31. Yeah, so we had a crazy winter storm last night. Pretty nuts. I been trying to upload videos. Right now, my internet is down, so I haven't been able to. I recorded a few videos. I recorded two yesterday, and I had them set and ready to go upload for uploading them this morning, but my internet is down for some reason. So I think it's because of the snow we got, which is crazy. We actually got a couple inches, and it's heavy snow, and it's stuck everywhere. So I think I have something. I think that's why my internet is acting wonky, but it's a thing here in the big city of Northport, Maine. But anyway, that being said, I finished up yesterday doing two videos. I got I got in a stack of movies over the weekend. About three new releases and then one older film over the weekend from Opera House Video. So I've been usually when I get movies there, I typically will do shows around them. Those aren't movies obviously that I own, but I still like to cover them and try spending some time talking about them. And it's usually a lot of fun. So I didn't get a chance to upload them yet, or the last two because of this internet problem here. But we'll see. But in the meantime, it's one thing I find. It's like there's never not enough time or more things to talk about. So you know, uh, yeah, why not? I'm always brainstorming and thinking of ideas on new shows that I can do, and in the midst right now of trying to set up some more interview shows. So it's a lot of fun. So today's show is a little bit of a different show. Recently, I think it was last week, John Carpenter, the famous, iconic horror director, got his Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame. And there was a whole big ceremony. I saw an interview, well, not an interview, but a speech that was given by Kurt Russell that was really cool. And I don't put a lot of emphasis, or I don't really put that kind of stuff on a big pedestal, like bands that I love that I think say are worthy of a Grammy, but then they never get nominated or whatever. Or a film that I really really love. I sometimes do, but that a film that doesn't get the notoriety that it deserves, or it gets passed up on nominations for an Academy Award, or certain directors. I mean, there's so many that great artists in the world that get passed up on for their amazing legacy of work. And John Carpenter, I wanted to do a show just kind of talking about him since this whole since he got his star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood, because he's obviously one of the most important directors around. I have a long history with him, so I just kind of wanted to do a quicker show about talking about John Carpenter and everything kind of related to his life and to his films, my exposure to his films. And I think this is probably a pretty common story, but the way my first John Carpenter movie that I ever saw was the original Halloween. I saw that came out, of course, in '78. One of the most iconic slasher movies ever made. It changed, it kind of changed the world of horror cinema, and it went on to become one of the most influential slasher movies of all time. I mean, and arguably the whole franchise, the Halloween franchise itself, is bigger now than it's ever been in a lot of ways, and it's amazing, and that's just one of many films that Carpenter has directed that are that's incredible. But that's pretty monumental, where a director can make one movie and it will kind of more or less set the world on fire. And this was like his second film. So, pretty unprecedented. And the other thing that was really massive was it at that time when it came out in '78, and then also even by today's standards, like that movie's definitely an independent film. I mean, it was made for very little money, and then it eventually found an audience. When it came out, it was successful, but it wasn't like huge. It was over time. When Halloween first came out, like it wasn't initially it didn't blow up the box office. Like, I mean, you have some, massively iconic horror films that kind of did that. Like Friday the 13th, Sean Cunningham's debut, second film. But the launch of the Friday the 13th franchise, that movie, when that came out, was a phenomenon. And then also Toby Hooper with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All classic grindhouse kind of slasher movies. But they were, these like seismic events. And Halloween was too, but commercially, from what I've read and from what I've read about the movie over the years and things I know about the film, initially it didn't really like do very well. It did okay, but over time, I think word circulated with fans and people, and then it went on to make a shit ton of money. But it took a little while, whereas those other films kind of it just was like this immediate thing. But it established Carpenter. That was the movie that cemented that made him who he was. Um, and I always think of what that was like when I first saw Halloween. And I saw it as a little kid. I remember seeing it as a little kid. I was born in '75, so I remember seeing it. I think I remember seeing it on television, like on TV, the first time, and then I eventually saw it on DVD. I saw it on VHS because I grew up, during the time. My earliest recollections of seeing movies were on, cable. You know, cable TV back then was different. You had like networks, ABC, HBO, and USA. There was a whole slew of cables, but there was a lot of kind of late night horror shows that would come on, like these horror marathons. There were these different series, like Tales from the Dark Side was a really great show. But they would have, late at night, they would do these late night marathons. And then where they would show movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or, Night of the Living Dead or House by the Cemetery. And they would show these movies, back to back. And I believe that, I know I eventually saw Halloween a bunch of times on VHS when that came out. But from my earliest recollection, I saw it when I was really, really young, and I believe it was on TV. And there were two different versions of Halloween. That one is I have not been able to find it. I have a DVD, or actually, I think it's no, actually, it's a DVD or a Blu-ray copy. I have multiple versions of it. I finally got Halloween, a really great version of it on Blu-ray. But there, when I saw it, there was a TV version that's actually a little bit longer, and then there's a theatrical version. And the television version is actually really good because it actually goes a little bit more into Michael Myers, the kid, the child, after he gets institutionalized for killing his sister, and his the sister's boyfriend, and that kind of the creation of Michael Myers. There's scenes that they cut out of the theatrical release, which I never understood why. But I've never been able to find that version of the film. I have it on Blu-ray, I have it on DVD, and they do have those scenes, but as basically cut out scenes. But anyway, I remember seeing it. My earliest recollection of seeing Halloween as a kid on like late night television, and I remember it just scared me. It gave me nightmares. It really terrified me. And that was definitely my first film of John Carpenter's career that I ever saw. And you know, one of the most iconic directors, and most of his films were you know in the 70s, or I should say in the 80s and whatnot, that were the movies that were his strongest, his most iconic films. Dean Cundon also, one of my favorite cinematographers, did all the cinematography for all of his films. Legend, just a legend. And John Carpenter also like scored a lot of his own films. Most notably and most well known would be Halloween. A real figure who really was so involved with every aspect of his film. But he's a great film composer too. I mean, even to today, he is, composing music for all kinds of newer horror films. So there's one film, I think it just came out or is coming out, but I can't remember the name of it. That it's brand new, and did he did the score for it. So he does a lot of partnership work with his son, and but it's pretty cool. Like he's kind of retired from filmmaking, and he's kind of gone on route of just doing being a film composer. So it's pretty awesome that he is able to have this amazing career. But along with Halloween, there's so many other great films. I mean, there's Christine, which I think is fantastic. I think it's one of the best kind of Stephen King adaptations. I've always loved that movie. They Live, amazing film. Probably my favorite John Carpenter film of all time is The Thing with Kurt Russell. That movie is such a masterpiece. I mean, it's untouchable. That's probably I'd probably say that that's probably my favorite Carpenter film of all time, and I think it's definitely one of my top five lists, as far as great, one of the greatest horror films ever made. But I think it's the best film that he's ever directed. It's just such a masterpiece. Escape from New York, another one that is just amazing and phenomenal. Saw in Precinct 13, his first film, another just incredible film. And I am a huge fan of In the Mouth of Madness with Sam Neill. His kind of Lovecraftian film, such an amazing film. The Fog, I think I don't know if I'm sure if I mentioned that, but The Fog, that's another movie that I saw. Like, it was, as a kid, it was Halloween and The Fog and The Thing that were just part of my youth. I saw the Thing a little bit later, but definitely The Fog and Halloween, and eventually The Thing. But those first two movies especially were in constant rotation for me as far as a kid, like always watching them. They were always on to some capacity. I have a few of his films on Blu-ray, like really good editions. I have a really great, beautiful edition of Halloween. Also, The Fog. I need to get upgrades on most of his films, though. It's kind of a shame. But those are some of the most iconic horror films I think ever made, and some of the greatest films that he's ever made. He's made countless others, but those are the films, when I just think about the body of work that with all the films he's directed, like those are the ones that just come to me as being like, probably his best work, especially when it comes to The Thing. I mean, that movie is just a masterpiece in pretty much every conceivable way. And as a truly in the spirit of being an independent film director and artist, he was one of the first guys to really do find incredible success kind of outside of the Hollywood system. And then also when it comes to practical effects, I mean, he always had so much. I mean, with The Thing especially, it was the start pretty much, who really put Rob Bottin, who was the effects designer from The Thing, put him on the map. Probably the greatest effects ever captured on screen. Rob Bottin, of course, did The Howling, pretty much my favorite werewolf movie of all time. But so many great, incredible films that he directed, and he basically stopped making films. I think there was one film, I can't remember the name of it. It was not very good. It was about this kind of haunted asylum, I think, kind of scenario. This girl who went crazy and goes into this asylum, but the asylum is kind of haunted or something. And it came out quite a few years ago. But that I believe that was his, one of his last movies. Going back to, like I mentioned, Escape from New York. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. I think that movie is so fucking good. It's such a great kind of critique on American society and fascism. I mean, it it's ripped. It's kind of terrifying on how so many of those themes that movie explores are things that we are living with now, in a real world, real life, real time scenario. But that's always, one of my favorites. His long career, of course, I said in the beginning of the show, like Kurt Russell gave a big speech about John Carpenter at the ceremony, and the ceremony for him getting the Hollywood star was, I think it was last week or the week before. And there were a bunch of other people that were there that worked with him, other actors, but I didn't really see those, but I did watch Kurt Russell's speech. And I mean, that's, you can't get any more appropriate than that. But he of course had a you know tremendously long career with Carpenter. And I can't forget, he also directed Elvis with Kurt Russell, starring Kurt Russell, which I have not seen in fucking years. That would be awesome to see. Another movie of Carpenter's that I think is really good, but total departure, completely different kind of a thing, but I think it's a really good movie, is Starman, Jeff Bridges. I bought that a couple of years ago on, I think it was Blu-ray. A movie in Carpenter's career that's part of Carpenter's career that's not talked about enough, but I think that's a really great movie. It's essentially, it's a science fiction movie, but it's essentially a love story. But it's very different than anything else that he's ever done, or kind of the style that he's known for. But really great film. But I'd say definitely, I mean, obviously Halloween is up there, the original. The Thing is my all-time favorite. I love that fucking movie. In the Mouth of Madness, I love that movie. The Fog. Prince of Darkness is really great. Vampires with James Woods is really good. There's They Live, masterpiece. Big Trouble in Little China, I can't believe I almost forgot that. That movie's a fucking masterpiece. I bought that on DVD at a sale at Opera House Video last year. That movie's a fucking masterpiece. That's one of my favorites too. I mean, just so many great, fantastic movies. And John Carpenter, I think, is one of those directors. Like right out of the gate, you he always had like a style. Like sometimes directors, they put out a bunch of movies, or it takes, they might put out really good, some good films, like, and then maybe 3 or 4 films into it, you start seeing like that they have a certain kind of style, if you will, and then you can kind of recognize that style or their kind of blueprint in other films. But with Carpenter, I feel like he kind of established his style as a filmmaker right away. With Assault on Precinct 13, like, which is such a fucking awesome movie. Also, into Halloween and all of the other classic films that he's directed, you can just see like right away, right out of the gates, that like John Carpenter had a really kind of unique style, a real kind of gritty approach. With a great use of, with Dean Cundon being, probably my favorite cinematographer, but the long history of their work where they're, his use of shadow and light and a lot of natural light, but you can just tell, you could tell right away that, wow, okay, John Carpenter has a very unique voice, a really distinct style as a filmmaker, and you can see it in every one of his films. I think, even with films that he's done, like say Starman, for instance, which is radically different, where it's essentially a love story. So yeah, one of the most important filmmakers ever, one of the most influential. So yeah, I mean, you can't say enough great things about John Carpenter. And he turned the Halloween franchise became, exploded, and obviously, all of the movies that have come out, and then he went on to make even more money off of, the when Blumhouse kind of bought the rights. So good for him. And he scored the music for those films, the reboots, even though I think they're kind of garbage. I do really like Halloween Ends, though. I think that movie's actually really great. That's the movie that was shit on the most, but that's actually my favorite as far as the newer versions. But yeah, great stuff. Halloween H2O was awesome. He didn't direct, and it's funny. He only directed, out of all of the Halloween movies that exist. I believe, he only directed the um, the first one. Every other film had virtually a different director. He was involved and produced some of the other films, like Part Two, Season of the Witch, which is a fucking masterpiece. But as big as the franchise is, it's kind of crazy that he's only actually directed one or two. But amazing legacy. John Carpenter, he's a living legend. So he gets all of the props, and all the acclaim that he gets, he deserves. So I just wanted to do a quick show on kind of recognizing, one of the masters of horror, John Carpenter. So peace, and we will see you next time.